I'd like to welcome the next panel. So as you know, I was talking to Vijay, who he's a tech lead at KPMG, about the panel, what we should be talking about. And I was talking about how about risk in the age of AI. And he said, you know what, Raj, the discussions that I've been having, risk in AI, he's well known, well talked about. You should be talking about the things that are happening in the boardroom. That is, how does security keep up with the innovation that's happening at the speed of AI? Whether AI will happen or not is a foregone conclusion. How can the security innovation can happen? How can security can enable innovation at the speed of AI? So that's what this panel is going to be about. And I'd like to welcome Vijay to introduce the panel and kick this off.
Thank you, Raj. Can you guys hear me all okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think Raj did a great job for introducing the panel and teeing it up. And first of all, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate showing up for the community and the support. Sort of imagine like this is 2027 RSA, right? And this is the headline that comes up in your newsfeed. An AI agent prevents more sophisticated cyber attack before even a human recognizes. Of course, there is an autonomous agent, very sophisticated attack from a state-sponsored exploit, rewrites the cloud access policy, builds up a decoy environment, patches the one less than a second, right? So no human involved. Of course, there is a second scenario. You get a news feed after an hour to say an AI mistakenly publishes personal information of 50 million customers. Company gets fined $2 billion. Of course, we live in this dual-edged sword that we are holding, and those both scenarios will happen. And I think the question is less about whether we'll secure at the speed of AI. It's more of whether we'll secure at the speed of AI with wisdom, trust, and resiliency from the get-go. Can we do that from the start? I think that's the real question. And today, it's very, very fortunate to have an amazing panel. We have Phil Venables, Anchal Gupta, and Karthik Swarnam. Please join me. Please give a round of applause for them. So I think that we couldn't have asked for a better panel, and of course there is amazing audience, and in terms of the brain power and the brain cells in this audience is amazing. So and I think the whole intent is sort of how can we sort of drive some lessons learned from the companies that are sort of building the next generation of AI platforms, and how do we balance innovation with security and guardrails, right? So I think it'll be great, maybe Anchal, Phil, and Karthik, if you can briefly introduce yourself. I think everybody knows you, but it'll be great to introduce yourself. Anchal.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Anchal Gupta. I'm CVP/GM at Microsoft. Key focus areas are AI Copilot and making sure security, responsible AI, digital safety, privacy.
Hi, Phil Venables. Up until a few weeks ago, I was the Chief Information Security Officer for Google Cloud, and now I'm a strategic security advisor to our CEO of Google Cloud and a few other things externally as well.
Right. I'm Karthik Swarnam. I'm Chief Security and Trust Officer at ArmorCode. Prior to that, I sat on your seats, right? I was a CISO at TransUnion, DirecTV, Kroger, and ran security at AT&T and spent about a dozen years at Accenture as well. So I've been on the practitioner side, now on the product vendor tech side. So,
awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and carving out time. So I know all of us got to think about there's two dimensions, right? There is securing AI, and then of course there is AI for security. So we all sort of see all the news given like some of the new threat vectors that have emerged. World Economic Forum says only 37% of the organizations are deploying AI safely to organizations, which is not a very comforting number. And then on the using AI for security, there are sort of AI-driven threat scenarios, whether of course sophisticated phishing to, you can have amazingly evasive malware, very creative ways deepfakes are happening. So that sophistication is also happening. So we got to counter that. Would love to sort of get sort of your views in terms of how should we think about the different components of securing AI, kind of AI stack, and then how should we evolve our traditional security capabilities that we have been used to sort of meet those, AI-driven threat scenarios. So, Anchal, Phil?
You go.
So first and foremost, I think we need to keep our focus on the traditional security methods because they will be required no matter what. Sometimes people think that they can just jump into some AI security and not take care of the basic hygiene. That's a mistake. Let's take care of the basic hygiene as we have been not so good at, I should say. So your MFA and patching and all of those things. Then the second part I would say is when you think about AI security and you are deploying it in your environment versus you are building it, these are two separate things. If you're building something, you have to think about what is your entire stack looking like, from the prompt to inferences to all the way to your models where you are hosting. And then you have to think about for each of these elements in your stack, how you're going to prevent the attacks, because it could be as simple as or as complicated as XPIA, cross-prompt injection attack. I said simple and complicated at the same time because someone can just, like, you may be thinking you are putting a very simple prompt and you may be doing XPIA within your own account. Or somebody else could be tricking you into it. Then there is your model poisoning could be happening. What is happening at inference layer? That is another big challenge. And I think as we will talk more about it, we will touch upon some of these different areas. But it's an entire stack that you have to keep into account. And yeah, I can talk forever, but.
No, so kind of building on that, I mean, kind of the attacker use of AI is we've seen them published a lot through our Google Threat Intelligence team that attackers are generally using AI just like all of us are to enhance their productivity, and so to generate better Python scripts to automate their work, and we've certainly found that, as well as kind of researching targets. We are definitely seeing them using constructing voice, video, and image fakes to dupe business processes, and that's certainly something we all have to adjust and be cognizant of that. The other thing as well, and just building on what you just said, is you see attackers constructing better phishing emails. Like, we don't need AI defenses to defend against AI constructed phishing emails. We need to implement strong phishing resistant authentication. So there's a little bit of kind of response to that. One of the things I kind of find it slightly depressing, although you think I should be happy that attackers are not using AI for really advanced things. I think they'll inevitably get there in chaining exploits together, finding vulnerabilities. The fact that I'm unhappy that they're not, it means that they're still having a ton of success on the basic crap. And so, again, I think it's like when we first started to see supply chain attacks, you got to feel good about that because it meant that they're having to go to more complex places. So I think we've got a lot of work to do to drive them to sophisticated use. And then in terms of safe use of AI, I could probably talk for hours about that, and we may get into it, but I would certainly commend everybody to take a look at the Coalition for Secure AI. So this is something we at Google co-founded with all of the other tech and AI companies to codify not just the security of AI, but what's the whole framework for how you build safe deployments, both from a data, a software, and an operating risk. And anybody can join the Coalition for Secure AI, and it's not just for the tech companies and AI labs. It's open to everybody. We're pushing a lot of our open source tooling and frameworks through that. So definitely commend joining the Coalition for Secure AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back, right, I think it's a fundamentals matter, right? So understanding your critical assets, number one, you need to understand. It doesn't matter if you're using AI or not using AI. You need to be able to understand what the use cases and what the value system behind it. You've got to be able to do the threat modeling. Obviously, the threat modeling and understanding what threats you're up against. And the threat vectors are taking different forms, right? So understanding those threat vector forms, right? So obviously, you need to be able to bring in the right set of tools for you to be able to handle those type of threats. So traditional, conventional capabilities may not graduate to the world that we're going to get into, but I would call it as unconventional aspects of this business, right? So I think the foundational aspects of attributes that you need to be able to thinking about are going to not change, but how are you going to thinking about it and what are you going to make it happen with is going to change, and people have to be open-minded to do that, right? There is a lot of tool fatigue out there, 8,000 security products, but that doesn't mean that you're going to shut the next tool up, right? Do you have the right capabilities and the right tools? And you need to challenge that every couple of years to be able to say, well, can this handle the threat vector that I'm going to be faced with now, right? So I think going back to the fundamentals, but you need to graduate the tool sets.
I mean, I think absolutely well said. When you think about 30 years of security infrastructure that we have spent money or made investments, right, from www to PKI to came PCs, endpoint protection to mobile to cloud to zero trust, etc. And of course, Google and Microsoft, you've got very native security solutions. From you have got Azure Content Safety, you got grounding services for Azure. Google, of course, have Model Armor, AI protection, etc. sort of baked in. I mean, what advice would you say for the enterprises here to say, how do you transform your core fundamental security capabilities like identity and access management, the security monitoring, patch management? Which ones are prime for disruption? What do you see in terms of where the most sort of the innovation that can happen and leapfrog, and given the era we are sort of getting into? So any feedback?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think when you look across all of the security space, just like any other type of business process or activity, it's ripe for disruption through better automation, and generative AI and other types of tooling are a lot easier to use to drive automation than previous generation of technology, albeit, like we've just talked about, you have to build in some risk mitigation for the use of those things. One of the things that we're finding, particularly on the use of agents to automate activities, is there's initial view that organizations take is they're going to take an agent and they're going to use it, or some other tool. It doesn't have to be encoded in an agent, but they use that to automate and augment somebody's job. We're finding that that's not necessarily the right way to do it. The right way to do it seems to be, from organizations we work with in our own experience, that using agents to automate tool use and then have agents work together to solve for a particular outcome seems to be better, for the simple reason, and this is kind of clearer in hindsight than it was when we first started working with organizations on this, is if you use AI to automate a job, you're just going to get an incremental improvement on the way you'd previously constructed that job. If you use AI to augment and drive tools and let AI decide how it's going to arrange itself to the best lineup of tools to achieve an outcome, you get a very different result than what you traditionally built as a human job. And that's kind of obvious in hindsight, that you don't want to use technology around the constraints of humans. You want to let AI figure out how to orchestrate itself and then have the humans work with that to drive the outcome. And that certainly turns out to be the case. And then when you look at it through that lens, you then start to say, how am I really reimagining how to do security operations as some kind of autonomic activity? How am I really reimagining how to do software development? How am I reimagining how to do testing and compliance assertions? And the whole set of stuff starts to realize you can do things very, very differently to not just get incremental improvement, but 10x, 100x improvement. And I think that starts to be the realization. But it sounds hopeful, but there's a ton of work to be done around all of the safety, security, compliance, privacy, operating risk constraints. So there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also, we have to go there safely as well.
Yeah. These are excellent points, and a lot of us in the room, when we think about AI, is what can we automate and how can we become better at detecting things, better at responding to things. And I think that part has been fairly clear to us. The pieces which, if your question really meant what are the new things that a startup company should be thinking about, I would say 2 to 3 things. One is, I briefly mentioned XPIA attack, this cross-prompt injection attack. We will need to find a solution to it, because this is an inherent problem with any AI agent. Not one kind, but it's going to be there, because they trust everything as secure, trusted input. Now, whether it is user input, whether it is your RAG, everything is considered trusted by LLMs. And that's where this injection comes in, and this is going to be a biggest challenge for us. So if any company can come and solve it at different layers, that will be a big, big deal. Then the second thing I feel where we are still not paying a lot of attention, and it's picking up pace, is agentic AI. We are, and Phil mentioned briefly about it, our automation is going to be 10x, 100x. And we are not talking about automation as we know it today. This is a very different level of automation. And when we are going to get to this 100x automation, through agents talking to other agents. Yeah, like your entire workflow is automated. You have these, I should say, employees of agents in your organization. And these agents are talking to each other, assigning tasks to each other. So you have to think about security at a very different level. What is the context they are sending to each other? How is it going to work?
So I mean, you definitely, Phil and Anshul, reminded, of course, kind of the, I'm going to age myself here, like the 90s and early 2000 business process re-engineering. So it's like that's like back, right? So you're going to reimagine and re-engineer your sort of core processes, right? And that's what it feels like. And as even at KPMG, sort of our research is like more than 50% of the organizations this year are already experimenting agents. And like 12% of above have already deployed. So I think, of course, there is sort of the proliferation that is going on, and we have, of course, from Google's A2A, Microsoft has agentic frameworks, and then MCP came out with Anthropic, et cetera, right? So there is still a lot of kind of early stage in terms of we are trying to live in the future, but we have sort of tools of the past trying to solve, like, we're going so fast in the agentic world. I mean, just this morning, there were like 3 startups pitching at the Innovation Sandbox, and of course, bringing security to the agents, right? How do you orchestrate that? I mean, how would you sort of course, in this room in organizations, it's early days, lots of sort of good framework and research happening in sort of managing agentic security. How should we think about some of the fundamentals? I think earlier talk was about thinking about as privileged access management. It is still like authentication, authorization. What are some of the fundamentals that the organization should think about in sort of course, applying and adopting some of the agentic security framework? I know Google and Microsoft and others, you already are on the path.
Yeah, I would say one thing there. Obviously, authentication authorization is going to be key. And right now, people are talking about, is it going to be working on behalf of? Is it going to be working with the identity of? And what kind of audit trailing we need, and all of those pieces. To me personally, the biggest challenge is going to be the memory context. Because once you start putting things in memory and these agents have a context and they are talking with each other, that's where it's going to be, once there is any security attack, it gets to persist. And when internet age happened, all of us were struggling with this XSS and XSRF and stored XSS. It was like this grass which will grow every week, and we all security practitioners will go and mow it, and then next week it's all up there again. I feel like we are going through a little bit of that phase where we still don't know how to systematically fix it. We are just trying to curb it down where it is within our risk appetite. But we have to come up with solutions which are scalable, which are going to be like, once you have put it in memory, what does it mean? And where is the context persisting? And how can I make sure that attack doesn't impact your entire organization and you can limit the scope?
Phil, anything? Yeah.
So I think a lot of AI use in the technology organizations for sure, right? So I live outside Chicago, right? When you look at it in the West Coast, East Coast, a lot of AI talk and AI exploration happening, right? When you go into a traditional company, it's a very experimentation stages still, right? So I think as part of that stages, as they shift left and as they start to think about it, what are the failure test cases that they can look at it, right? Thinking at it from that perspective, what are the AI use cases that they have and how are they going to do it? Not from security perspective, but more from the core business perspective. How am I using AI? I'm a retailer. What am I going to do? What is the use cases? What is the type of data that I'm going to give it out to? What are the controlled use cases that I'm going to have, right? What are the failure? If companies start to think about all of that stuff, then they can form what's their risk appetite and how much that they can play with, right? So I think I would say controlled experimentation is probably one of the areas that's the only way we're going to learn, right? And I think, even, for example, we at ArmorCode, we just released agentic AI with Anya, right? We don't even know something that we're going to ask and what is it going to come back with, right? So we're in that phases where the system does learn and you also understand, right? So it's accidental exploration to some extent that will happen as companies start to explore further.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this is going to, so, to everybody's point, when you look at agentic AI, everybody's still figuring out what the permission model is. So, an agent will have an identity and have a set of permissions that are granted to it by the person or thing that's driving that agent. But then, unlike other privilege protocols. That agent is then going to have the ability to delegate to another agent, which may still delegate to another agent because these are networks and things. I think everybody's still figuring this out. And then when you look at some of the protocols like MCP, which is the protocol for AI to access tools, that's, we're just building security into that. And certainly I wouldn't recommend kind of, somebody throws up on the internet an MCP server for something, I wouldn't necessarily trust that. You should be kind of doing this in your own trust boundary, but that'll get figured out over time. And there's a lot of innovation happening. So I'll give you an example. So this whole problem of the fact that the control plane and the data plane of the use of AI is munged together, which is why you get all of these kind of tool poisoning, prompt injection, other types of poisoning. That's going to get figured out. So Google DeepMind published a few weeks ago a system called CAMEL, C-A-M-E-L. It's basically, again, it's a split LLM where you've got like a supervisor LLM and an actual interface LLM, and it's a way of trying to break apart. There's some issues with it, but it's generally pretty good. It's a way of breaking apart the control plane and the data plane of an LLM. So, there's hope out there that will put these structural things in place. And then the final thing I'll say is, again, is to remember that MCP is just one part of the puzzle. The other part, which is something we announced about 3 weeks ago with about 50 partners, and it's an open protocol, is the A2A, agent-to-agent protocol. So MCP is about AI to tool. A2A is about agent-to-agent orchestration, and thankfully that's got a lot of built-in security to it in terms of authentication and permissioning and other things. But to what everybody said, it's like the beginning of the web, it's like the beginning of mobile, it's like the very beginning of cloud. There's a lot of good stuff going on, but where everybody's architecting in the frameworks. And the final thing I'll say is, even when all of that's right, it's still going to be interesting on some second-order effects. So imagine a world of agents acting on our behalf. What does that look like in terms of how we're going to control the behavior of all of those agents out there in the world and how they're interacting? What does it mean for there to be, imagine if you've got, billions of agents hunting for the best deal, the best price, the best travel booking, the best this, and somebody kind of artificially pushes up like the wrong price. So think of this as like flash crashes, like every agent's going to like drop onto that website and go, I want that deal. So, we're going to have to build in business logic orchestration, business logic control. This is going to be real good fun over the next few years.
Yeah.
So I think the Gartner predicted something like 40 billion agents by
That's probably on the low side.
That's on the low side, right? It's like we have 8 billion in the population as a planet, but we'll have billions.
And people talk about artificial general intelligence. There's a few of us that think that AGI is never going to come from a single model. It's rather going to come as an emergent property of a set of agents interacting with each other. It's like, ants versus anthills. Right.
So I was going to go to AGI. I'm glad you brought it up. I was keeping it to the end. Maybe I will hold it to the end. I guess all of three organizations, right? Microsoft, Google, massive sort of global organizations, right? Generating massive amount of code, and then the feature release and product release, et cetera, is happening. And of course, Karthik, from ArmorCode perspective, that's the core of your business, to kind of reviewing the application code, et cetera, right? Of course, like 80% of the code, of course, Andrewing is like, hey, 100% of the code will be written by AI by end of this year. So how do we keep pace with sort of reviewing the whole, validating the testing, et cetera, right? It's like, do we have the right even tools to manage the speed and pace, right? And of course, from Google and Microsoft, you've got massive amount of sort of code being written.
This is an AI problem, and which actually adds value. So we need to be able to handle that with the AI generative tools, right? Basically, so for us, when we are developing code and we're developing a product set, whether we're trying to find what our deficiencies in our code, we're definitely using our AI capabilities to find the deficiencies in the code, right? Using AI for correlation and AI for remediation, right? Meaning that helps you elevate the, diminish the noise factor and push up what is really at risk and what is really needs to be tended to and addressed to, right? And with that contextuality that comes in, which is actually better, you're not actually fixing everything, right? You're fixing what matters, and so that you're not saying, oh, this is highly vulnerable with no context to it, right? So going back from the perspective, it is about how do I identify using these AI capabilities, what my deficiencies are as the code gets developed, as the code gets built, how do I correlate to understand how can I even get remediation done, right? And then go through those automated remediation capabilities. The accountability still rests on the development organization and lead, right? The accountability doesn't definitely get shifted, but the responsibility goes back into the tooling capability that we have, right? So that helps us get through the code faster. But definitely, more code is being generated, not just for ArmorCode, for anybody else. And if you have existing, current, yesterday, last year, last generation of tools, they're not going to be able to keep up with it, right? And those tools will also be poisoned to tell you that, hey, that's not even a deficiency, right? So you need to be able to migrate those pieces.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I mean, I think that volume point is the key thing, which is more code will be generated, and that is a good thing. That's the whole point of a lot of these things. But that also points to the fact that if there's throughput pressures on your software, not just your software security, but your software QA testing and validation pipeline, then you're going to have even more pressures on it. And you're going to have to also be concerned about, have you got all of your software development activity? So we talk about kind of AI being a democratizing technology. It opens up the ability for more people to contribute technically and to build things that may not necessarily have always been kind of hardcore traditional software engineers. You can have more of a software base built more generally, and that's going to put even more pressure on not just the throughput, but the type of things you're looking for in a software QA and security pipeline. Thankfully, again, the good news as well is AI tooling will help augment that, to your point. And I think we're certainly finding that, and a lot of companies are finding that. And so again, this kind of evolution of AI generation and AI validation in existing software development and QA processes is kind of the flywheel we need to keep getting going.
Yeah. And I think at least I can share within Microsoft what we are looking at is when we started our journey, it was more about, on the agentic side, it was more about, this is a coding agent, this is a testing agent. Now we are looking at the whole entire pipeline and we are saying, these are the builder agents. So they do the whole process end to end. Like you just come up with the idea and this agent sort of recruits all these different agents. So there's hierarchy of these agents and it says, okay, go ahead, put this requirements document together. Then it goes and gives to the other agent and it says, now some people may be hearing this and thinking, okay, what does it mean for real humans then? If these agents are going to talk to each other and do the whole thing and be done with it, well, it definitely will increase the efficiency and the speed of everything we are doing. But we will need human in the loop at every stage to make sure that what we are doing is exactly what we needed. And as a result, our jobs will become that much more interesting. Today I can tell you, like even if you ask a SOC person, a security operations person, and they will say, yes, I love my job, but probably I love 30 to 40% of it because the rest of it is little bit of administrative work, which goes into like, give me access to this data store here, give me access to that data store. Now, their life is going to be very different with these agents because next morning they come in, they'll say, out of the 50 alerts, here are the 3 alerts we want you to look at. We have already granted you access to all the right systems, so JIT and GI in action. And here are the proposals for you to do something about it. Now you can say, yes, this is what I agree and this is the one I want to dig in further. So much richer experience for us as humans as opposed to what we do today. That's what excites me about these things.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, like talk about kind of career development in an AI agentic world. Everybody's going to be a manager, whether you like it or not. It's just you might be managing agents rather than people, or a combination, and you might be required to think about how you're going to make sure the people and the agents get along together to achieve the outcome. So,
I think it's going to be amazing for the HR. I'm going to think about what's the digital workforce, and think about how the HR needs to transform, right? Yeah. Think about.
I mean, some of them
what
will be
is the
comfortable.
Performance management for?
Yes.
So some of them will be comfortable managing machines versus managing humans, right? So.
That's true.
I think one of the things that Raj also pointed out, just kind of switching gears to sort of managing risk, right? So of course, we've all been sort of in the CISO roles and security leadership roles, right? And there's so much experimentation happens, and we all trying to balance innovation with guardrails, et cetera. I mean, maybe a 2-part question, like, how does the risk appetite change in this AI era, right? And when things are moving so fast? And is there such a thing as like what is good enough?
I'll start on the other side, right? We have seen so many incidents and breaches in the past where somebody would say, well, the data was there in the log management system. It was hidden in plain sight, right? We have known a large retailer gone through that, right? So the problem we would all, as a security practitioners for the last 20, 30 years, you'd say, well, it's hard to find a needle in a haystack, right? But we have arrived where you can find the needle in that haystack, right? So I think that is going to compensate for that capacity, right? We've talked about what Anshul was talking about right now. The agents are going to prop me up. False positives are going to be reduced, right? So I need to be able to, human in the loop is only going to deal with a few things, right? While they're only dealing with a few things, their capacity has been harvested to go ahead and deal with how do I even secure the AI agents, right? Now we have responsibilities of watching that, fox that's guarding the hen house with the CCTV camera, right? So we're migrating in terms of that, that food chain. So obviously that capacity will be redirected to how do I securely generate these agentic AI agents that can cooperate, right? So
yeah. So to Karthik's point, I think our overall surface is also getting broader and broader, because earlier, I think Phil, you touched upon this briefly as well. Earlier, we used to think about just security as cyber security. Now, safety, like your responsible AI and digital safety, they are munged together. You cannot say, here is my Gen AI agent, but its output may not be a safe output. And it is all considered all in one. And I'll give you one example, and this is where even our customers, when we as Microsoft, we are talking to our customers, they're also trying to figure out what is it that they want. So Copilot, for example, you can use Copilot to summarize your Word documents. Let's take that M365 Copilot. And we have some default settings for our Copilot where if your documents have harmful content, we will not summarize it because that's our safety bar for it. And we got feedback from our customers saying, these are the law enforcement agencies. And now imagine what their documents look like. It's all harmful content, line after line, from rape to kidnapping to everything is in there you can think of. So our tools, they purchase some pilot licenses this is useless for us. They don't work because we refuse to summarize any of that. Now, we had to go back and think about, okay, we have customers coming in the entire spectrum. Some customers really want it to be relaxed. And how can we still relax it for certain set of customers, but not harm the community? Or even if we are relaxing it for broader community, how can we make sure it is not misused? Because if you're saying summarize the document, let's make sure the summarized document is not any more harmful than what was the input, because otherwise people will start to use it to generate even more harmful content. And that's the problem of this whole Gen AI space. So something for us to continue to think about how to keep our community safer while we are deploying these within our environment.
I think, broadly as well, coming back to some of the stuff we touched on before, I think there's when we talk to boards and not just CISOs, but the risk, audit, compliance, and other communities in large organizations that are deploying this, there's those three pillars. One, it's a software lifecycle risk, because ultimately this is a bunch of software, including all of the open source software, the vendor software, all of the parameters and other tuning aspects of the models. And then it's a data governance pillar, which is you've got to worry about your training data, your test data, your fine-tuning data, the data that's the ongoing memory of some of these systems, and so this is a big data governance problem. And third and final pillar, it's an operational risk problem, because you've got to worry about the guards on the input, the output, the controls about how these systems interact with other IT systems or even physical systems, and so those three things of software lifecycle, data governance, and operational risk. There's very few organizations that have risk and security functions that are equipped to do that. Oddly enough, the banks, we're finding, have actually quite good experience of doing this, because they've done a lot of algorithmic trading over the years and other systems. They're compelled to have data governance. They've focused on software lifecycle risk, and they've been driven and through their own need to manage operational risk. But what's interesting, and it's back to kind of the board risk point, we're finding a lot of organizations in other sectors that don't have those well-developed risk functions, compliance functions that really understand the end-to-end process of software lifecycle risk, data governance risk, and operational risk. It's coming onto the CISO and team to be that risk function for the enterprise. And it's almost like the CISO in many orgs as a result, where the board and the CEO has gone, hey, like, you're managing the securities. Can you just manage all the compliance, safety, all of the other risk as well? And so it's almost like the CISO is becoming the chief digital risk officer that they always wanted to be because they have to be because of AI. It's kind of an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, but CISO's role is managing risk,
That's
correct?
right. That's right. And it's kind of really cementing that position that everybody always strive to be and should be. And it's weird that kind of AI has like really put them in.
Pushing
It's a forcing function.
Forcing
I think we're seeing that in so many things. Like a quick example is like large SaaS company. There are certain things we should have been just doing regardless. We didn't need AI to do that. For example, the whole incident management, vuln management, patching. The forcing function happened is because they say, hey, you know what? We've got all this backlog. Let's help prioritize risk, contextualize, and then find me the accountable owners. I'm like, that we didn't need AI for that. We should have done that regardless. But I think this is becoming a forcing function, which is of course amazing. I mean, I think maybe a question also given, Microsoft, Google, large global organizations, right? How do you say, of course, product and engineering have different OKRs, different priorities, how they measure their speed and scale is different. From a security perspective, how are you sort of building trust, with them, partnership, et cetera, to make sure, A, you have the right tooling, and yes, you are baked in the same safeguards, and you have sort of the partnership. Like, what are some of the lessons learned that
I mean, like, the big thing for us over the years, we've talked a lot about secure by design and secure by default. And, the way we like to think about this now, like for years as a security community, we've talked about shift left. So how do you shift left in the design life cycle so you're building security in earlier? Where we increasingly think of this based on our own experience as shift downward, not shift left. So baking security into the platform itself so that when developers or engineers or anybody else or even our customers are building on the platform, they've got features that have already been shifted downward into the platform that they're inheriting. So we spend a lot of time with our engineers, and we have like well over 100,000 of them, making sure that they're appropriately educated and attuned to managing not just security, but also privacy and compliance and safety risks across all of our environment. But we don't really expect them to have to build this stuff from scratch. So they work in an environment where they're getting the authentication, the authorization, the encryption, a whole array of other things that are just delivered as part of our kind of platform that they build on. And we're trying to use that internal experience that we've had in building Google to push the same thing to our customers and just raise the bar so that when a customer's building on GCP, for example, they're just inheriting a bunch of controls. Yeah, they still have to do control work and security work, but they shouldn't have to like recreate authentication, encryption, authorization, logging, all of that configuration management stuff. And I think that's the lesson we've learned internally. We're trying to push to customers as well.
We are also, because this area is still relatively new, we grew so fast in the AI space, all of us, we are learning so many things. Where we started initially with our customer engagement, it was mostly about, hey, what are you going to use my data for? Are you going to train your models? Are you going to ship my data here and there? Once that wave was over and we were like, nobody is using your data to train these models, your data is not leaving your tenant boundary, all your processes which are acting on this data are within the tenant, they were like, okay, this makes much more sense. But now it's at the next phase where as these new attacks are evolving, whether it is because of MCP, whether it is because of XPIA, whether it is because of any of these other things, where a customer who deploys these agents in their environment, today they may not have the right controls, like right access controls, but they don't know. To your point, Vijay, where there is no forcing function. They just don't know that the entire company has access to that document that their CEO wrote. But because nobody knows what the name of it or nobody knows how to look up for it, they just feel it's like security through obscurity is going on there. Now with these agents, you go and ask a question. You are not ill-intended, but you ask a question, and back comes a document which you should not have access to, but you do have access to. So you have to sometimes even educate your customers that, hey folks, it's your security through obscurity, those days are gone. And for some of these cases, we are going to make sure there is a human in the loop involved, we give the right thing, so at least the document is not exfiltrated. But within the organization, you had the legitimate access, so they can read those documents. So these are some of the things we have to be very front and center with our customers and tell them what is the risk involved and how they have to manage the risk. And now the risk bar is very different, and this is the conversation they should be having with their boards, because boards also sometimes don't realize what does it entail. They are looking for, are we doing AI folks? Like sometimes the board members may be asking this question in the room for their management team. Are we looping in all the AI things that we should be? But they don't know what risks they are inheriting and how to mitigate those risks.
So I know the favorite topic probably for everybody's mind, of course, this year has been the year of agents, now the AGI or superintelligence. So of course, Demis Habbassis has their predictions, and other folks have talked about it's going to come faster than we thought, and folks are talking about 2030. Like, how do enterprises prepare for that? Like, we are still like catching up, and there is lots of building blocks as we talked about. Like,
I'd kind of take you slightly off track a little bit, because I think one of the things is, and this is worth remembering, and this is why I think this current and future wave of AI is just so exciting, is there's a temptation in the industry and the media to really focus on this being kind of chatbots, whether you're interacting with Gemini or Claude or the others. The GPT, that was the one. I'm fixated on Gemini. So there's a temptation to kind of focus on this is all the chatbot experience, but the actual like real crazy stuff happening is in like materials discovery, pharmaceutical development, a whole array of other things. We've published work on how AI has helped us develop new quantum error correction algorithms that is advancing quantum computing. It's just like all over the place, and I think sometimes many organizations that we work with, it's not just the customer service chatbot or the image or video generation that helps on some branding on some website. It's fundamental deep things about inventing new materials, new drugs, new processes for manufacturing, and that is really transformational.
I mean, I think what you also, I totally agree with you. I think it's the abundance that we have all created with this. Now it's about like how do we utilize this abundance that we've all created with AI, right? Any thoughts on AGI from?
Yeah, I think, I also think we can't just sit anymore with all of this coming in. When I think about just pure quantum computing and this fourth state of matter, you probably all saw from Microsoft that we created this chip Majorana, and the single chip has the computing power of the entire world's compute right now. Now think about what it can do, and especially even for just the CISOs in this room, whatever algorithms we were thinking were secure, wherever we were thinking that we can't.
Well, PKI comes back.
Whole PKI is back here, and anybody capturing any of that traffic and thinking, yes, I'm going to unravel it, yes, they will be able to unravel it. So there's a lot of that. I was meeting with one of the customers, ONGC, like our Indian ONGC, oil and natural gas, and they were like, we really want to tap into the power of all of this AI, and where we want the power is, today we scan the area to figure out whether there is oil here and whether we should be drilling. And it takes us good 5 years to process all the data that we get from our tools. And we want that 5 years to be reduced to a year, to be 6 months, because that will be so much faster for us. And that's where all of this power is going to come into. Yeah.
For sure. Karthik?
I think you picking up on the right use cases is going to be very, very essential, right? And as from a security perspective, we need to be able to start thinking about how do we shift our thinking in security, right? Not keeping the bad things out, but keeping the good things in, right? There's a subtle difference between thinking about it, right? I think that's one. Testing for failures versus testing for success, right? That's a philosophical shift as well, right? I think we start to do that, then you would start to talk about where is AGI applicable in my environment, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all commercial organizations, and we need to be able to care for yesterday's capabilities that we have and care for the future capabilities we have, right? So I think it's about applicability on specific use cases like Anshul was talking about. When you start to do that, then you will start to think about what your threat vector is and what's keeping good in and keeping the bad out, not even focusing on keeping the bad out, but keeping the good in, right? We'll start to form into a place.
But I think where it's like we talked about before, it's also going to get interesting is these second order effects. I mean, again, imagine today you've got a lawyer who uses an AI to generate a contract. That's sent over to the other law firm who's using an AI to summarize that contract. Is what was asked for and what was summarized the same thing? It doesn't matter. The court's just going to look at what was actually shipped. And so, everybody is adapting to these things. It's just like one tiny thing. I mean, it's, and again, it's like, imagine the future where, it's like that old joke where, somebody sits and writes a prompt and it generates an email, and at the other end, the recipient uses AI to turn it back into one. Like, why not just send them the prompt in the first place? And so again, when you think about what's the knock-on effects of not really knowing if what you intended to send is actually being received by the human after their AI has distilled it. This is going to be like search engine optimization for AI all over again. So it's, the reason I kind of bring this up is because it's interesting, but also was once we've, while we're still working on the foundation layers of authentication, identity, privilege delegation, all of these other things we've been talking about, we've also, as security and risk professionals, got to be thinking about the second order societal effects and business effects, that what comes after what comes next with this technology. It's like the beginning of mobile. So, when mobile first happened in 2007 with iPhone and Android and all these things, we were focused on kind of mobile attacks and this attack. But what actually happened was a few years later, the risks we got to deal with was what was built on those platforms. Those were the kind of the cascading effects. And AI is just going to be the same. We're going to have to think about, we're going to have to clearly focus on the first order effects, but the second order effects are going to be where the real interesting stuff is.
Yeah, next year, maybe you all will be sending your AI agents to this talk, and we'll be sending our AI agent to talk to your AI agents. Who knows?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And actually, authenticity might be the real difference.
Yes.
So it's funny, artists are very worried about this stuff, but, artists are finding that, the thing that is the most authentic becomes most valuable in a large array of content. It's kind of interesting. So maybe that'll happen next year. Then the year after, we'll all be back, and it'll be like,
Yeah, or maybe we will be doing the dishwashing, and agents will be doing the paintings. And
well, there goes the physical AI, and we'll have another hour to talk about that. Thank you very much for being here, and really appreciate Anshul, Phil, and Karthik. A big round of applause for our panelists. So thank you so much.
Thank you.